Hey there everyone, welcome to Tales in Text and I'm your host Nesha. In today's Tales in Text episode, I'm going to be talking about a book that won the Pulitzer Prize, in fact the 2019 Pulitzer Prize, and has been hailed as one of the best works that humanity has produced in literary circles. And if you guessed this book, kudos. If you haven't, that's okay. The book I'm talking about is The Overstory by Richard Powers. So just for some background, The Overstory by Richard Powers is a massive book. It's humongous, that essentially talks of humanity's greed versus nature's compassion and generosity. The book, in fact, is based on the premise of why humans need to stop deforestation, why we need to stop logging trees, and why we need to preserve our forests. And if I have to consider just this premise, I think this book is very, very much needed, and it does deserve to get a Pulitzer Prize just for the theme of protecting nature, of safeguarding nature, of not abusing nature, and the generosity that she offers humanity. We are, after all, not the inheritors of the earth. We are just guardians who are here to protect the earth, take only what we need and return whatever we don't need back to the earth, and to restore the earth's fecundity and preserve her landscapes and ensure that the earth is in a beautiful health and amazing state when we as a species move on and someone else comes to take our place as her guardians. We are not her inheritors, and we do not have a right on what she has to offer. We learn so much about trees and plants and how they really benefit the planet and how they really benefit us. That everything, absolutely everything, right from the book that we read to the table that we seat ourselves at to have dinner, to the wardrobe in which we keep our office supplies and what have you, absolutely everything comes from the wood produced by trees. Most of the medicines that we use today are either organically harvested or synthetically based on, that is, they're imitators of extracts found naturally in thousands of plants and tree species. Even world globalization and the world growing and the world becoming closer is because of plants and trees. Everything that we are today and everything that we will become tomorrow is a result or is a consequence of the generosity of nature. And we haven't done right by Mother Earth. And that is basically the premise on which the Overstory is based. And for this, I agree 100% that this book needs to get a Pulitzer Prize. But there are a couple of, in fact, a lot of areas in that book where I felt like the Overstory was overrated and, yes, downright racist. And that is basically what I want to talk about here today. One of the most glaring issues that I had with the Overstory was that it was overtly racist. I don't know if Richard Powers realized he was being racist or not. The book just felt like Richard was just poking fun at people of color and at immigrants. There are two characters who are immigrants or who come from immigrant families, and both of them have been painted in a very caricature kind of way. This caricaturish portrayal made me want to gag. The first character is Mimi Ma, whose father is Chinese, and he comes from China, and he comes as an immigrant to the United States. He marries an American woman and he has 3 daughters, the eldest of whom is Mimi Ma. And the second character that I have a problem with is Neele Mehta, whose parents are from India, from the state of Rajasthan, and both of them relocate to the US to give their son a better chance at life. And Neele grows up in a conventional Indian home, but amidst an American society. Now that should kind of set the stage for what you can expect. Now, if you are someone who lives in a predominantly white nation and you are white yourself, but you have friends who are people of color, you may have certain experiences which might resonate in this book, and for you it might feel like, hey, I don't think Richard was being racist. I just think this is how immigrant kids are, first generation, second generation kids are when they move to a country where they are completely different from the predominant race and culture. Yet I feel like there is something so hugely problematic here. For one, Mimi Ma, because she's from China, a lot of her history, now all of these characters, all of the protagonists, the first part of this book basically talks of the backstories of all the main characters. So we talk of why they are invested in the movement to protect trees, why they are invested in conservation, and all of these stories are essentially, they tie back to their experiences with plants and trees growing up, and Mimi Ma is no exception. And when her story is explained, there are a lot of references to Buddha, to enlightenment, to typical philosophical Chinese themes that just feel out of place. It feels really forced, as though the author was trying to make Mimi's ancestry feel more spiritually rooted or philosophical than it needed to be. I understand the concept of trees having a spiritual symbolism and meaning, because I'm from India, and a lot of the religious symbols that we use have to do with plants and trees. I get it. While we might feel like using trees as a spiritual metaphor in order to engage Mimi, who is American for all intents and purposes except for the way she looks, to kind of engage with her father, whom she cannot connect with when she's younger, but then she does when she's older because of the spiritual symbolism of trees. I get where the idea comes from, but the character and the story isn't fully fleshed out. It feels like Richard wanted to just infuse like these disparate ideas together to kind of just flimsily set a stage and just walk away saying that, hey, you know what, I mentioned these couple of ideas here, and you know what, this is why Mimi is so invested in what she's doing. I felt like the whole Chinese philosophy was underdone, and if Richard genuinely wanted to invest in developing this idea of the Buddha, of the journey to enlightenment that he talks of in the book, I think there should have been a more nuanced understanding of these philosophical tenets. So to me, that felt a little bit racist, because it kind of tried to show how the American or the white individual looks at East Asian or Asian cultures through this Oriental perspective. The second problem that I have is with Nilay Mehta, and that I have a huge problem with that. Now, while I do have a problem with Mimi Ma's character and story development, because I am not as familiar with Chinese philosophy or Chinese culture, I don't have very strong feelings about the problems that I mentioned, although I find them annoying. But Nilay Mehta's character and his story is just downright offensive to me. In order to prove that Nilay is the prototypical Indian boy who comes with his family in the hopes of getting this big IT job and, you know, making a life for himself and a name for himself and creating these softwares or hardware that put him on the global map, that is something that Richard has tapped into in this book. Now, I get that India exports a lot of engineers or families who want to become engineers overseas, because engineering and IT related occupations are considered prestigious occupations in India. And I get that, you know, Silicon Valley, just as many other places in the US, is populated with Indians who are into IT. And so I can kind of forgive the author for making Nilay this nerdy boy who's socially inept, who can't have a conversation with anyone apart from his parents, because he just can't connect with them, because he's this genius who is destined to do big things in IT and who's only fixated on, you know, his algorithms and his gaming and his coding and so on. Maybe the author has met someone like that who fits the bill, and perhaps Neele's character is based on that. I am kind of willing to give a partial leeway to that. But what seriously annoys me is how the author has tried to literally stuff down the reader's throats the point of Vishnu being the creator. Now, if you are familiar with Hindu mythology, you know that the Trimurti, or the Hindu Trinity, is Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, or Shiva. Brahma is the originator, Vishnu is basically the preserver, and Shiva or Maheshwara is the destroyer. Now, right off the bat, the whole concept of Vishnu creating something is wrong, because that task is taken by Brahma. So Richard gets that wrong right off the bat, because there are a lot of sentences where he talks of how Vishnu has created this fig tree, for example, or like how Vishnu has put all living possibility into this little microprocessor and things like that. What Richard is trying to describe is the act of creation, and in Hindu mythology, Vishnu does not create, Vishnu preserves. So right off the bat, that's completely wrong. And secondly, the author talks a lot of Vishnu's 8 arms just waving everywhere, the paraphernalia it holds, and how a tree looks like Vishnu's arms and things like that. Now, I totally get, like, just like with Mimi, finding spiritual and religious symbolism with trees. But we're essentially talking about a kid who, in the book, it's made very clear, Neele has no idea about Indian culture or Hindu mythology. He learns about Hinduism through these comic books that his father just hands him. He doesn't really have any connect or any understanding of culture. And these comments of Vishnu being the creator are made by his father, who is supposedly supposed to know Hindu scriptures. Not only is this whole cultural opinion wrong, and I know some of you might say that, hey, Richard Powers isn't Hindu, so how do you expect him to know all this in detail? Well, then he shouldn't have used it in the story then. Whenever you're using someone's culture or religion in a particular story, you need to make sure that you have your facts right. And this fundamental fact of creation versus preservation is something that is very integral to the concept of Hinduism, and they are very distinct roles. What I felt when reading this book, or rather I should say listening to this book, because I was listening to it on Audible, is not annoyance at the author getting the cultural aspects wrong, but rather that he was trying to create, like I said, a caricature of what an Indian looks like to a foreigner's or a white person's perspective. It just felt very racist. It kind of felt like, to a white person, Indians are all about curry, they're all about multi-limbed gods, they're all about not eating beef, and or they're all about filial piety, and just these notions, which I agree do have some cultural rootedness, or they are rooted in culture, but they're not true across the board. Trying to force this Indianness onto a character who doesn't feel Indian himself feels very inauthentic and just absurd. And to me, I honestly felt that both Mimi Ma and Neele Mehta's characters were very racist. Because if you consider the other characters who were written in this book, none of them had that caricaturish patina, you could call it. They didn't have that sort of stereotypical outlook applied to them. And let me tell you, because a lot of these people are from across America. Some of them are from the deep south, some of them are from the northwest, some of them are from different places, in the United States. So if you're going to discuss about stereotypes, about a particular person, there are a lot of stereotypes that a southerner or a person who's living in the deep south would have associated with them compared to someone who's living somewhere in the north, right? And the fact that none of the other characters are written in this way make me feel that this was a deliberate choice by the author to make both Minima and Nile Mehta kind of play up their cultural stereotypes just to kind of play to the gallery. And that's not right. And because of this, it also makes me feel, even though it's not very explicitly mentioned in the book, that the other characters in the book are all white. They are not people of color. Another issue that I had was how in this book there was not a single character of indigenous Turtle Island origin. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this term, the name of what is today known as North America is called by many indigenous communities and activists as Turtle Island. And this predominantly goes back into their origin myths, into the origin myths of the indigenous people of the land that is today called North America, but which originally was called Turtle Island. And there's not a single character in the book that belongs to any indigenous tribe or indigenous community, which is highly laughable because let's face it, America is not a white nation. It's not a through and through white nation. It is a nation where white people colonized the land belonging to the indigenous communities. Let's just kind of get this right out there so that we can understand what an egregious error has been made here today, right? In this book. Not only is the author racist in their representation of the only two people who are visibly people of color and visibly immigrants, but they've also not dignified people who come from indigenous communities by having a character like that in the book. And you know what makes this really, really ridiculous is that indigenous communities have been living side by side. They've been coexisting with nature without harming the earth for millennia. Now, for those of you who have not followed my channel, who are new to my channel, I have done a course in religion and ecology from Yale University through Coursera. This was a massive online open course. And I studied about how religious beliefs from not just mainstream religions, but even indigenous religious and cultural value systems, how they have impacted the earth. And one thing that I learned in one of the course, it's actually a 5-course specialization. One of the course is in indigenous beliefs, and a large chunk, almost 50% of the course, is about the indigenous, nature beliefs and nature lifestyle of the people of Turtle Island. And indigenous communities have coexisted with Mother Nature without harming her, without being greedy, by living their best lives while also giving back to the earth for millennia. How is this not a part of a book that is about championing nature's rights? How is this not spoken about or mentioned or represented in a book that talks of how humans should live with the earth instead of what we're doing right now? Why is it not written? What is wrong here? What's happening? And I am not overreacting. And I actually find it ridiculous that except for just one review that I saw on YouTube, everyone else seems to be gung-ho about this book. And that is a problem. Because that means that we are looking at just the tag of a Pulitzer Prize, or the fact that this is a very well published author, or we are just giving excuses to an author because we agree with the theme on which this book is based, and we're kind of turning a blind eye to the rest of the problems, or we are in such a position of privilege that we cannot see the problems that are inherently existing in this book. I don't know what to say, except that this book is not very well written. I did listen to this book on Audible, like I mentioned, and perhaps my feelings of annoyance at the racist undertones or of this book, or at the racist overtones, because let's just face it, the overstory of those two characters and the absence of indigenous communities in this book is very overtly, to me, very racist, very exclusionary, if For those of you who find the word racist too harsh right now, exclusionary is another word that I'd use. The audiobook was also narrated in a way that kind of amped up these racial disparities. And which is actually why I feel that this kind of makes my point, right? If an audiobook narrator has to adopt a stereotypical Chinese accent, a stereotypical Apu type Indian accent when they are voicing these characters, clearly you know that the stereotypical racist issues are very, very obvious. I'm not happy with the Overstory. This book kind of felt like a mishmash of a non-fiction book that was written only about trees. And mind you, the information about the trees and the plants themselves was actually very interesting, and I think that is the only saving grace for this book right now. That was kind of like mushed up together into this really inedible mess with a half-baked story that was just stuffed in order to prove the author's point. I think this book would have done way, way better and would have been even more powerful had it just been a non-fiction book written in an accessible way to help the everyday reader understand how we can engage with the earth in a much more holistic way, rather than this convoluted story. I have very, very conflicted feelings about this book because, like I mentioned, I do think the theme deserves an award because we need more books that champion nature and nature's rights. But the way this was done was just not good. It wasn't correct. This book kind of reminded me of another book that I've done a review of, which is called Latitudes of Longing by Shubhangi Swaroop. And that's actually based in India. And again, while that book doesn't have racist undertones per se because it is written by an Indian author based in India, I didn't feel so much of a disconnect. That book was again about humans engaging with nature. And again, that book kind of felt like it would have done better had it just been a non-fiction book instead of trying to force it into becoming a fiction book. So if you've read Latitudes of Longing, you might actually see those kind of concurrent themes in the book, and you might see where I'm coming from. So yeah, overall, do I recommend the Overstory? Honestly, no. I think there are plenty of non-fiction books out there that can give you the same information or similar information and can drive home the point that we need to act better with the earth. We need to treat this planet with more respect. That we need to be generous with the earth and not be so greedy. I think this point can be driven home much better through a non-fiction book. And these days, in fact, I just read an article yesterday where how non-fiction books are becoming more popular because they're helping effect change around the world. And I think you are definitely going to find authors writing for different groups, whether it is experts in a field or someone who is a layperson who wants just rudimentary information. You can find a lot of those in a diverse set of books out there, and I think you do much better with that. I think that's my verdict. The Overstory is overrated, and it is racist, it is exclusionary, and it is just not worth the hype and just not worth the Pulitzer Prize. So yeah, if you've stuck around with me so far, thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments down below what you think of the book. Do you agree with the comments I've made? Do you not? I'd love to have a discussion with you about this because this book is a seminal piece of literature right now, and I would definitely love to discuss this with you. So yeah, I'll see you soon. Bye.